Week 3 in the NFL is in the books. So today on Sports Around the Bar, we're going to be talking about how each team did and some of our takeaways from their games this week. Timestamps, as always, are in the description. So if you're looking for your particular team, go ahead and click on that. Starting first with the 49ers and Giants. This is a battle of two teams that, if you look at it on paper, you'd swear the Giants were the ones playing everybody on the second string. The 49ers came in, pretty much won in every facet of the game here. I mean, when we're talking about Nick Mullins coming in, he looked like the better quarterback today, even against someone like Daniel Jones that seems to be a quality young prospect for the Giants. Mullins was absolutely great, going 25 of 36 for 343 yards. He also had a touchdown, no interceptions. The kid looks like he's one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL today. So watching him come in and beat a team that, even though they are still in rebuilding mode like the Giants are, watching him come in and pretty much dominating, especially in the second half, should be encouraging to 49ers fans who have been just racked with injuries up to this point. They overcame a ton of injuries, as I said, on both sides of the ball, and they look good doing it in this win. Obviously, they lost week 1 against the Cardinals. It seems like they've kind of shaken off a little bit of that rust, and this game, they looked like a Super Bowl contender even without a lot of their top talent being available today. So I know it was just the Giants. I know the Giants are still a team that have a lot of holes, and we'll talk about them here in just a second. But the 49ers absolutely impressed me with the way they came in and didn't miss a beat, it seemed like, against a team that's still NFL caliber with an up-and-coming quarterback. Talking about the Giants next, Daniel Jones had a rough day against this defense, which should be a little discouraging for somebody that's looking for him to be their starting quarterback going forward. I like Daniel Jones. On the record here, I wasn't crazy about the draft pick, but I am crazy about the way he's played since he's got into the NFL. Today, you just got to chalk it up as a bad start. I think he had a lot of issues throwing the ball. They definitely were not sharp. His offensive line was being dominated, even by a defense that's missing guys like Solomon Thomas and Nick Bosa. They have done a fantastic job of getting after the passer in San Francisco. That continued today against the Giants. When we're talking about this team going forward, I think you just gotta shrug your shoulders and say it wasn't our day for Daniel Jones. He made a couple plays with his legs. He was off in the past today. You have to hope that gets better in the future when we're talking about him playing. Moving over to the Giants, Daniel Jones had a rough day, and not one you want to see when he's coming in and playing against a team missing so many of their starters. I know they went to the Super Bowl last year, and they are still a great team by NFL standards, but for Giants fans, you should be a little discouraged by the way today went. I'm going to chalk it up to one bad start, though. Again, Daniel Jones has been very good since he came into the league. He has had some issues with turnovers, and that continued today, but he made some plays with his legs. He didn't do a great job passing, but when we're talking about Daniel Jones, I think the key to remember is you still need to add more to this offense before we're really going to know exactly what he is. His tackles got absolutely dominated today. The rest of the offensive line didn't do very well either. They couldn't run the ball very effectively. The 49ers looked like a Super Bowl team playing a team that's rebuilding, even with all the injuries they've had. I can't put it all on the quarterback, but we need to see that get better if the Giants are going to continue to ride with Daniel Jones as their starting quarterback. After that, the defense needs to play better. I'm sorry, you're going up against a backup quarterback. You need to find a way to keep 36 points off the board for them. There's no excuse for allowing that many points to a guy like Nick Mullins, who has been good as a backup quarterback, but when we're talking about this offense and how banged up they've been, missing their starting running back in Mostert, also losing guys like Emmanuel Sanders to free agency, they need to do better. We need to see more out of the Giants defense, or we're talking about the Giants having another top 5 pick again if things continue the way they've been going. Moving on to the Bears and the Falcons. The Bears complete another comeback against the Atlanta Falcons, the second bad comeback of the year the Falcons have allowed. Let's start with the Bears and talk about Nick Foles came into this game and took it over. I've been saying for weeks, and I've been saying pretty much since they picked him up, Nick Foles needs to be the starting quarterback in Chicago. There's no reason to trade for him if he's not going to be your starting quarterback. Instead, they chose to give Mitch Trubisky about 2.5 weeks. Even though they've won both of those games, they didn't do it in great fashion. Mitch Trubisky had a couple good quarters where he came in and played very well, or you could even say a half in one of those games was pretty good for Mitch Trubisky, but it wasn't consistent enough. Instead, we got Nick Foles coming in off the bench, cold as can be, and coming in and beating the Falcons. He could have thrown for 5 touchdowns in this game. He threw for 3, and he threw an interception. There were a couple worrying throws where he threw them kind of at defenders, and the defenders couldn't make the play on them. But Nick Foles threw what could have been 5 touchdown passes in this, one that was kind of wrestled out of Allen Robinson's hands, and in my opinion, is still a touchdown, and another one that was just dropped, I believe it was by Miller in the end zone. 2 touchdowns that didn't go up on the board, as well as 3 that did. Nick Foles is the clear-cut starter for Chicago, and I think this team can challenge for a playoff spot as long as he's the starting quarterback. I know they're 3-0 now, off to a fantastic start. We're talking about 7 teams making it in the NFC. They should feel very confident with a guy like Nick Foles as long as they can protect him as their quarterback in Chicago going forward. The defense did a great job of frustrating Matt Ryan. When I look at the way this team played, I wasn't expecting that. I thought Matt Ryan would put 25 to 26 points on the board, and he did. But most of that came on the ground. Most of that came from Todd Gurley rushing the ball. Matt Ryan was pretty well frustrated and pretty well contained by the Chicago defense. So props to them for taking one of the most prolific passers in the NFL out of the game in this one. If they can do that on a consistent basis, and then they have quality passing in Nick Foles, this is going to be a dangerous team coming out of Chicago. Look for them to do great things as long as the quarterback play stays somewhat higher than what Mitch Trubisky gave them. Moving over to the Falcons, they ran the ball well. Obviously, they couldn't throw the ball very well, like we talked about a second ago. That should be a bit of an issue. I think Chicago kind of keyed on the pass and said, if anything, we're going to try to take Matt Ryan out of the game. That's their one strength in Atlanta right now. The defense is awful. They haven't been very good at running the ball. Their saving grace has been Matt Ryan throwing the ball. And I know they're 0-3, but Matt Ryan's been pretty good in each of those games up till this point. That should concern you that he was taken out of this game as well, because if that goes, this is going to be a team drafting towards the top 5 of the draft in the NFL this year. The only other thing I can say as a positive is they did a good job against Dave Montgomery. He was one of my keys to the game before it started, that Montgomery was going to have a good day. He did okay, but he didn't do well enough, as well as I was expecting him to do against a depleted defense like Atlanta has. They did a good job stopping the run. It's just they couldn't do anything when Nick Foles came in. They have to find a way to stop giving up these leads. This has been 2 games back-to-back that they've had a comfortable lead that they let slip after halftime. This time because of a substitution. Last time simply because they seemed to lose focus, especially on an onside kick against Dallas. This team has a lot of mental problems going on, a lot of mental errors being committed, and a lot of just unable to finish because they seem to be losing concentration. They need to get that under control, otherwise it's time for Dan Quinn to go. I know there have been people kind of rumbling saying it's time for him to go in the midseason. Maybe the Falcons can salvage it, but in my opinion, I don't think Arthur Blank's going to do that. I think they're going to ride with Dan Quinn out through the rest of the season, and we're going to see Atlanta replace him if things don't get a lot better in a hurry in Atlanta. Still at 1 o'clock, let's talk about a barn burner between the Titans and the Vikings, because this is the game I watched in real time. And let me tell you, the Titans can't do anything easy. They now have a 3-0 record on a 6-point differential, which means in all 3 of those games, they've only outscored their opponents by 6 points. Obviously, that can't continue. The defense needs to get a lot better for the Titans. Their defensive line played better against the Vikings, racking up a couple sacks, showing up in the clutch when they needed to, especially Jeffrey Simmons making a big play that was ultimately called pass interference against Kirk Cousins, or roughing the passer against Kirk Cousins. Shouldn't have been. Titans did a great job on the offensive side of the ball. When they keyed on Derrick Henry, they threw it down the field. They took advantage of that. When they kind of backed up a little bit, Henry got his yards in and is now, unless Edwards-Helaire has a great night on Monday night, the leading rusher in the NFL right now. Going forward, though, for the Titans, the defense is still a major, major issue for them, especially their secondary. They need to find a way to limit some of these passing yards. Justin Jefferson has a career day against the Titans, receiving over 178 yards. Adam Thielen got his work in as well. Dalvin Cook set a career high in rushing. That's unsustainable. I know the Vikings wound up losing this game because of a couple mistakes. The Titans need to find a way to shore up their secondary, or that 3-0 record is going to look like 3-3 very, very quickly, especially with as tough of a schedule as they have coming up. Moving on to the Vikings, they did a good job holding the Titans to field goals in a lot of situations. They did a good job keeping them out of the end zone. They just allowed too many times the Titans to get down into field goal range and had those same kind of mental errors from Kirk Cousins that have kind of bitten him in the ass a couple times. Ultimately, this game for the Vikings boiled down to there just being too many mistakes. They made, again, what should have been a pick six. They've had a fumble from Dalvin Cook. If they could have controlled that a little bit and not let the Titans kind of rally in the second half, this team would be walking out with their first win of the game. There were a lot of times I felt like they were the better team. They just kind of let the Titans hang around and ultimately at the end of the game couldn't close it out with a game-winning drive that Kirk Cousins was given. He was given almost a 2-minute drill to get down and kick a field goal. Didn't work out for them after some clumsy penalties and their offensive line basically folding on the last drive. So if they're going to be successful, and I think they can be. This Vikings team for 0-3 is maybe the best 0-3 team in the NFL right now. They need to start narrowing down some of these mistakes and start playing more consistently, and this team can be still a contender, in my opinion, with there being 7 playoff spots. I wouldn't call them dead in the water like most years when a team starts 0-3. I think they have a chance to still make the playoffs if they turn it around quick and kind of get the right mentality going. Oh, Buffalo and the Rams, because this one, no matter how you spin it, somebody's going to be mad. But when I talk about this game, I'm going to talk about the Bills first because they won. I usually talk about the winner first. But they should have lost this game. I think they got very, very lucky on that 4th and 9 where they had a very fortunate, I will say, very soft pass interference call go their way. I don't think I would have thrown the flag if I was a ref. I would have kept that one in my pocket having watched it. But Josh Allen looked good. Outside of that, Josh Allen has looked very, very solid throwing the ball, very dynamic, and that was my biggest takeaway from him for the first couple of years in the NFL was he needs to get more consistent throwing the ball. He needs to be more on target more often to really take a step forward and be what's a lot of people can consider his potential to be an elite quarterback in the NFL. He's done that so far, especially in this game. He put up a fantastic stat line. I mean, the guy was absolutely dominant in this game, throwing the ball on the Rams, who, again, defensively have been somewhat stout this year. It was a bit of a worry to watch them let the Rams creep back in the way they did, but they managed to close it out. They managed to make the play at the end of the game, even if it took a little bit of luck to get there. The Bills, I will say, probably still deserve the win just by the way they kind of got out in front of the Rams. As far as the Rams go, it was a great comeback after falling behind early. This team absolutely should be 3-0 in my opinion. I don't think that pass interference should have been called just as quick as it was. It was almost a jam, and it was barely any contact. I know Buffalo fans probably disagree with that. Again, I felt like it was a little soft. This team should be 3-0 right now. I can't say anything negative about them. I thought this was going to be one of the teams that would be struggling a little bit in 2020. Instead, they've looked pretty sharp. They've been in every game that they've won, and as far as I'm concerned, this team should be 3-0. Next, let's talk Raiders and Patriots, because this game, well, let's start with the Patriots. The run game and the defense both look absolutely great. Michel had 117 yards on 9 carries. Looks like the guy is back, and you never know with the Patriots who's going to be able to carry the ball. This run game dominated Oakland's defense. My big question and my big takeaway from them is, can they beat a team like the Bills playing like this? Because even though they had a success on the ground, I don't know that they'll have that same success week in and week out. Cam Newton struggled a little bit in this one here. He didn't put up a great stat line, did enough to get the win, and that's all that matters. But I do question whether that's going to translate when we talk about the cream of the crop in the AFC. Can they beat the Chiefs? Can they beat the Ravens? Can they beat the Raiders playing like this? The answer to me at this point is no, but for now, the Patriots move on and they're 2-1. As far as the Raiders go, they didn't play poorly, but I still think they're lacking some weapons, and I still think they're lacking what it's going to take to win their division and to challenge in the AFC. Henry Ruggs missed this game, so they were missing some of the down-their-field presence that he brings, even though he hasn't put up massive stat lines to this point in the NFL, or in his NFL career. I think it's important to have a guy like that. It's important to have a guy that can push defenses farther back to open up that run game. They still did well on the ground, but the Raiders, in my opinion, missed a guy like Ruggs and probably still need to get a little bit better and a little bit more dynamic on the offensive side of the ball if they're going to be a playoff caliber team both this year and going forward. With the Texans and Steelers, all I can say for the Steelers is this was a fantastic team win. 240 yards passing, 169 yards rushing, 5 sacks, an interception. They played well almost in every facet of the game. I think when we're talking about them, the Steelers are a dangerous team. We talked a lot last year about they just need Big Ben back. They just need Big Ben back. What would this team look like with Big Ben? Well, now we're seeing it. They're 3-0. They just beat the Texans. They've played well all the way up to this point. Now they're going to have another test against Tennessee here, but if they can win that game and start 4-0, we're talking about one of the best teams in football, mainly on the backs of their defense, but their offense is performing as well. I see them as a sleeper team, maybe even in the playoffs, to make a deep run with how they've played so far. As far as the Texans go, talk about a tough schedule going into the season, man. Houston played the Chiefs, they played the Ravens, they've now played the Steelers. Those first 3 weeks, 2 of them on the road, that's brutal. And now that they're going into week 4, 0-3, they need to get back on track, and they need to do it in a hurry. There's rumors that they're talking about picking up Earl Thomas, but at the very least, let's talk about what they do have and where they're at right now. I won't say they're dead in the water. This is still a good team that outside of week 1 against the Chiefs has looked relatively impressive to me. I know they were trailing behind the Ravens, but they did a decent job in that game. I felt like they played hard, and even though things didn't go their way, they battled all the way through. Same thing with this one. They were always in it. They kind of lost at the end of the game, and I know the Steelers could have punched another touchdown in to make it a 2-score game, but I never felt like they were out of this game watching it. I felt like they made some good plays. They were just... It wasn't their day, and now that we're talking about them being at 0-3, they do need to turn it on in a hurry. But this team has played well enough that I'm not closing the book on the Houston Texans in 2020 just yet. Another loss or two, maybe we talk about it. But with 7 teams making the playoffs, this could absolutely still be one of them, especially if they do well in their own division. Washington and the Browns. Washington. I thought the former Redskins, now just football team, were going to battle the Browns a little bit tougher when I watched them in the first half. But things fell apart, man. Let's start with the Browns, though. Again, we start with the winners. They did a great job of establishing the run against a good defensive front. I know Chase Young went out with an injury here, but they still had, on 37 carries, 158 yards in the ground. And that's important. Cleveland is establishing an identity as a running team and one that's able to establish its will. They scored 2 TDs off the ground as well. This team's done a great job of just out-muscling a team that's dedicated a lot of its resources towards the defensive front of the football. That's going to be important in the playoffs to have that type of identity, and I think Cleveland can make it if they continue to play this way. Now, while the defense has been sort of suspect this year, I can't fault them in this game because even though they gave up some yards, they still had 3 interceptions. They forced 4 fumbles, recovering 2 of them. That's, again, top-level defensive play, in my opinion, regardless of the yards you give up. You do that, you're going to win almost every week in the NFL. Anytime you turn the ball over 5 times, you're going to give your offense plenty of opportunities. I like to see that for the Browns. They did a great job in this game of forcing a young quarterback in Dwayne Haskins to make mistakes. Well, let's talk about Haskins next. Again, too many mistakes. You can't turn the ball over that many times. The guy, he had 2 fumbles here. He had 3 interceptions. Ron Rivera said it himself. The clock is ticking on Dwayne Haskins. He needs to show some improvement. And I agree with that. I was one of the guys stepping up to bat for him in the offseason when those rumors were swirling around saying, Tua Tagovailoa, the Redskins should consider drafting him, and they were the Redskins back then. They should consider drafting Tua and getting rid of Dwayne Haskins. And I said, it's only been 1 year. We need to relax. We need to give him more time. Now that we're moving into year 2, we need to see some form of progression. We need to see the flash that guys like Daniel Jones have shown at a time. Guys like Sam Darnold that, again, continue to hang on to their jobs and haven't necessarily had people calling for their heads because we've seen sort of just that sneak peek of what could be. Dwayne Haskins has had a little bit of that, but not a whole lot, and it's time for that to change. He's got guys like Terry McLaurin. We need to see him have a couple games in the next few where we can kind of say Dwayne Haskins can be an elite-level starter in the NFL if we put the right kind of pieces around him. Haven't seen that yet. Still a lot of issues here. The other thing I'll say about Haskins is we can chop it up as just a bad day for him, as seeing as how this is the first game he's had a turnover in. It needs to get better. He's one of those guys that we need to key on, and we're going to watch coming forward to see if he's going to make it long-term in the NFL. He's going to have to turn it around in the short term. Now let's talk about the Bengals and Eagles tying at 23. As far as the Bengals go, I want to talk about them first. More encouraging play out of Burrow. They're throwing the ball an awful lot for a guy that is as young of a quarterback as he is. They're almost throwing caution to the wind, where usually you run the ball a little bit more with a young quarterback and try to establish the run game and let him build off of that. He's actually got the most passing attempts out of 3 weeks than any other quarterback in the NFL. Props to Cincinnati. It looks like they've got a good one here. They just need to find a way to fix this offensive line because, man, that was atrocious. 8 sacks. I know they played an overtime quarter, but 8 sacks against your quarterback in any given week, unacceptable. Doesn't matter who you're playing. This is a team that, if they can fix the offensive line, this offense could be one of the better ones in the NFL. They have Joe Mixon running the ball. If they can get the offensive line working right, they've got some underrated weapons with guys like Auden Tate, Tyler Boyd in their receiving court. Now T. Higgins, it seems like. They've got guys and bodies at wide receiver who can make an impact. They seem like they have the quarterback. They've got a good running back. Fix the offensive line, Cincinnati will have a good offense again. Switching over to the Eagles, too many mistakes here, 2 picks, fumbles on top of it, false start on the field goal to win the game in overtime. Just too many mistakes out of a team that you should have been able to handle easily. They have, I know they're 0-2-1 and technically only a half game out of first place in the division, but this start from the Eagles, I think the Super Bowl window is closed. And I know a lot of people are pointing at Wentz. I'm going to point to his wide receivers. They just don't seem like they have any weapons to be able to do anything. The offensive line has taken a step back due to injury. They've lost some guys. They're not as good as they were. This team, they're just fortunate they're playing in such a bad division. They're still in the race because everyone else seems to be stumbling out of the blocks just like they are. If they can turn it around and they can, maybe Alshon Jeffrey gets healthy, maybe Jalen Reagor when he comes back and their offensive line plays a little bit better, we could be talking about the Eagles being still one of the best teams in the NFL, in the NFC especially, with everybody healthy. But for now, with the injuries that they have, they couldn't even beat Cincinnati. What else do you need me to tell you about them? And they did dominate their offensive line, Cincinnati's offensive line with their defensive line. Brandon Graham coming back is big for this team, but with the secondary as bad as it is, it's hard for me to pick this team to beat many teams just because it seems like anytime anyone wants to throw against them, they have wide open receivers all over the field. Moving on to our afternoon games, let's talk about the Lions and the Cardinals. The Lions squeaked out a win against a team that, in my opinion, should have beat them. Taking advantage of some early mistakes and some turnovers from the Cardinals, the Lions were able to squeak out a 26-23 win. Three interceptions is a good sign, especially from a defense that has been a little bit lackluster, I will say. You've got a young cornerback in Jeff Okudah that got his first pick today. Good start. It's a good sign from him early on in his NFL career to see him make those kind of plays, even against a young quarterback like Kyler Murray. To do that and to generate those turnovers against a team that is now flush with weapons like the Cardinals are, great sign for the Lions. We just need to see this a little bit more consistently, and maybe the Lions are back. I mean, talking about them really quick, they've got Matt Stafford. Adrian Peterson seems like he's still RB1 for them and doing his job. The defense is, again, one of the big question marks for me with them, but if they play like they did today, they can beat some teams, and maybe we're talking about 8 wins for this Lions team. The only other takeaway I have for this is, what does it tell you about their young running backs that Adrian Peterson's getting the lion's share of the carries? I mean, guys like Kerryon Johnson, DeAndre Swift seem to be having a hard time getting on the field. I know they had a couple carries apiece, and Swift was out there for some passing work, but when I look at this, the fact that they turned to a 35-year-old running back in Adrian Peterson instead of going with these young guys that they've significantly spent resources to bring in, just makes me wonder if they picked the right guys at running back or how much faith they have in them, I should say. We'll monitor that going forward. It'll be fun to watch to see how that backfield in Detroit shakes up and starts to share the carries. Moving over to the Cardinals, aside from a couple mistakes, Kyler Murray looked really, really good. He's another young quarterback that's showing a lot of flash and a lot of potential out there in Arizona. I know they brought in DeAndre Hopkins, and it seems like it solves a lot of problems for him, but man, the kid looks like the real deal, and he looks worthy of that first pick they spent on him. As far as DeAndre Hopkins, this guy's still just destroying it with every quarterback it seems like he's playing with. 350 yards in the first 3 games. Absolutely dominant performance out of him. Obviously, it's looking like they won that trade with the Texans earlier, even though I don't think there's anyone out there saying they didn't. I'm willing to say for the Cardinals, this is a trip-up game from still a young team trying to find itself. They're still dangerous, 2-1, off to a great start. I know this is a disappointing loss for them, at least going into this game. You should have said we can beat the Lions, but 2-1 for this team should be fun to watch going forward, especially watching them match up against the 49ers again, and then the Seahawks twice. I want to see what they can do against teams like that in the division, because this division is looking like the best one in football right now, at least through 3 weeks. The Buccaneers dismantled the Broncos, who again, the injury bug bites with Jarrell Casey going out with a torn bicep. 28-10, another respectable win from Tom Brady, leading with this. It doesn't look like this team for the Buccaneers is just a good offense. I mean, everyone was talking about how unstoppable they were going to be on offense, but this defense and the special teams generating turnovers, and the defense showing up and playing hard on every snap and looking like one of the better defenses in the NFL, this looks like a complete team. And I know the offense has been, maybe not quite dominant, not quite as good as you want to see when you sign a guy like Tom Brady, but still been very good. They've looked good on every facet of the ball. Offense, defense, special teams, this team's looked fantastic, and I know they lost week 1 at the Saints, but this team could still be in the running when we're talking about at the end of the season for the Super Bowl. The only negative I can say is I want to see them run better. They weren't quite as efficient as they should be running the ball. This offensive line is a little bit more designed for pass blocking, a little bit more of a finesse offensive line. I'd like to see him run the ball a little bit better. Ronald Jones did okay. Leonard Fournette struggled with his yards per carry, but still, as far as that goes, they've done well enough that I can say the Buccaneers are a legit contender in the NFL. Moving over to the Broncos, 6 sacks allowed, no real run game. The offensive line was the problem today for Denver, and again, this is still a group that needs to get a lot better. They brought in Mike Munchak to be their offensive line coach. I expect they'll improve going forward. But for now, this is the weakness of that team. Jeff Driscoll struggled when he was under pressure, and he was under pressure a lot to the point where they pulled him at one point. This Broncos team is going to have a lot of struggles. The injury bug seems to have bit them. I don't know that they're going to recover. It's a little early with the 7-team playoff to call them dead in the water, but at this point, 0-3, the injuries looking the way they are. I think the Broncos have probably played their way out of the playoffs already, even as early as this season is, unfortunately. Next, let's talk Cowboys and Seahawks. As the Seahawks edge out the Cowboys 38-31. Russell Wilson never disappoints, man, and he has been absolutely phenomenal again this year. Moving over, the defense also, again, kept the Cowboys in check, especially early. They did a good job against them. They forced 3 turnovers. Seattle's defense, for all that we've criticized them, has done well enough to put them in position to win games. I'd like to see them improve, but for now, not a bad unit, not a bad group of guys that have been able to put their elite quarterback in Russell Wilson in positions to win games. The Cowboys, when we're talking about Dak Prescott, he put up a great stat line when you talk about it. 37 of 57, 472 yards, 3 touchdowns. The turnovers killed him, I think, with a fumble and then 2 interceptions. It's just that those kind of mistakes aren't going to be good enough to beat someone like Russell Wilson. I think that was the big issue in this one. If the Cowboys didn't turn the ball over as much, I think they probably could have won this game. The run game was also a little lackluster. Zeke was pretty much kept in check for most of the game. They need to do better, and they should do better with what they've invested in this offensive line and into Zeke Elliott. They should do better against a team like the Seahawks. Look for that to improve going forward. As much negative as we can say about the Cowboys, you could say their only win came off of mental mistakes that Atlanta has made and them blowing a lead. They're still tied for the lead in the division, even though they're 1-2. Again, with as soft as this division is, Cowboys don't have anything to panic about just yet, and still have time and the luxury of time to kind of get used to each other and get used to this new high-powered offense, bringing in guys like CeeDee Lamb. Not time to hit the panic button in Dallas by any means, even though they're 1-2. They certainly will be able to outshoot the Redskins. I think they'll be able to outshoot the Giants as well. The Eagles seem like they're still the competition in this division, but the Eagles have struggled very mightily as well early. So there's a good chance the Cowboys are just going to waltz into a playoff spot regardless of how anyone else does. Panthers and Chargers next. Another game that, again, a little perplexing to watch. The Panthers, Bridgewater was efficient in this one with no turnovers, threw 235 yards. Not a bad performance by any means, but they had to settle for a lot of field goals, which that could be due to a lack of CMC. They did well kind of leaning on Mike Davis, but they're going to need to get in the end zone more to consistently win football games this year. We'll see. I like the efficiency, but again, efficiency also kind of ties into getting into the end zone and scoring 7 points instead of settling for 3. As far as the Chargers go, 4 fumbles. Anytime you have 4 of those, especially when you lose 3 of them like they did, it's really, really difficult to win. Props to them for hanging with them and keeping the Panthers in check. This defense has been pretty good. We're talking about them holding the Bengals to almost no points. The Chiefs, they kept in check for a good chunk of the game. Now we're talking about them only giving up 21 points to the Panthers. This defense has been very good. And even though they had a bunch of turnovers in this game, there were some bright spots from Herbert as well. He made some nice throws, throwing into coverage as well as making good decisions out of it. Still a bright spot. I'll say chalk this up to young quarterback, still learning the game. We'll see how they do in the next couple weeks, and we'll talk about the Chargers more going forward. They're going to be one to keep an eye on. Well, I don't think they're going to make a whole lot of waves in 2020. Maybe in 2021, especially if they can build back up on the offensive line. This could be one of the better teams in the NFL if Herbert pans out. About the Jets and the Colts only because we have to, and I said we talk about every game that happened during the week. We'll get to Sunday and Monday Night Football in another video, but the Jets, absolutely terrible. We'll talk about them next, but first let's start with the Colts. Phillip Rivers was unstoppable through the air for the Colts. We're talking about a ground game that was efficient, even if it wasn't totally explosive. 3.8 a carry is good enough to get the job done. They generated 2 pick sixes. The defense scored more points than they allowed in this game, where they had another pick in the end zone to stop the Jets on one of their only kind of effective drives. The Colts won every aspect of this game. There's no sugarcoating it. The Colts dominated the Jets from day one, and while Sam Darnold has gotten a lot of slack from a lot of people, including myself, it's got to get better than this even with the weapons that he has. So far as the Jets go, 2 bad decisions and a jump timing route for Sam Darnold. It ruined the day. Again, you can't throw 2 pick sixes in the NFL. You just can't do it. Sam Darnold has long been a quarterback that I've considered to be just sort of underutilized and undersupported with the Jets. But it's still incumbent on you not to turn the ball over. and he did that today. The Colts dominated this team. The offensive line lost for him. The receivers couldn't get open. He made bad decisions. They couldn't run the ball. This whole game, just throw it out for the Jets, because right now this looks like one of the worst teams in football. They can't continue to have days like this and expect Sam Darnold to survive this offseason, especially if they wind up with picks 1, 2, or 3, and they're in striking range to get a quarterback like Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence in the offseason. Finally, the defense had no answers, especially for Rivers. This is just a team that it seems like nothing is going well for. So while we're talking about them, they need to get better. Where? Everywhere. So hopefully they can do that. Hopefully week 4 is not quite as ugly for the Jets as it is in week 3. But for now, if I was doing a power rankings, I would say the Jets are at the bottom of the list for me. Hey, thanks for watching. If you agree with what you saw, make sure you hit the like button down below in this video. It helps me out immensely when it comes to the YouTube algorithm. If you didn't agree with me, that's okay too. We're here to talk sports and we're here to disagree on things. It's what makes it fun. Throw a comment down below. Let me know what you disagree with. Let me know your thoughts on the matter. And if you haven't yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button right here so we can talk sports every day.